Welcome to the Controversial Exchange. This is our year in review. Super excited. So we're going to hit 3 different angles on this. Really just a reflection on the podcast last year, where it went, what we're kind of thinking as next steps. We're going to also look at personal life, just kind of sharing a bit of like what happened to us last year, reflecting on that, and what's coming up. And then really the field of behavior analysis, we want to reflect on that a bit too. So there's going to be 3 segments, I'd say, on this. Super stoked. Let's maybe set the stage for folks on where the podcast came from, what the goals were last year, and then we'll get into evaluation of that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, man, let's do it. Podcast. So I guess the podcast happened just you and me having a conversation about doing something a little bit more candid, right? A little bit less, a little more raw, a little more unedited, a little more.
Yeah, and I was learning that much of social media across platforms, and I guess humans in their natural environment like controversial stuff, or at least they click into it a lot. So it was kind of like, hey, I feel like I'm missing this, like, let's really dive into things that I would sometimes avoid to be safe because they were controversial in nature to some degree. And this started with just things like the divide between, practitioners and researchers, or the divide between verbal behavior approaches and relational frame theory approaches. But I guess I don't know if I articulated this at that point, but it was meant to kind of be like this exploratory 12 episodes, 1 a month, kind of see what happens. And I don't know, we went through some growing pains, I'd say, yeah?
Man, well, I mean, like, I think that both of us are alpha A-type personalities and, like, kind of have that just go fuck it mentality. So it was like, we started having a lot of fun, I think, So it was like, we picked these topics, and the one thing, before we get into that part, though, I think that, like, just addressing the title of the podcast, because we picked the Controversial Exchange, and it was like, well, I mean, because you were like, yeah, I wanted to address these topics, but like, I think what naturally occurred was that it kind of started putting us in the direction of exuding particular personas. You know what I mean? That matched the title, rather than having the idea and the title fit what we were trying to say. Yeah. And I think that led us down an interesting path. But yeah, we just wanted to do a 12-episode exploratory thing of like some of these big ass topics that honestly, I personally need a disambiguation for. Like they were areas of like personal confliction for me. Cause I was like, I don't understand, like, cause I'd participate in these conversations at like, conferences, or like with like important people that are like smart people that, I at the time really had some major imposter syndrome. Like, I have no business talking to this person. Like, who the fuck am I, and, they would make statements or talk about things in such a way where it would either go over my head or make me feel really insecure because I didn't understand like the position, the players, the variables, all the different things that fed into like why this was a problem or why it was a thing that they thought was worth talking about. And honestly, I got obsessed with podcasts, and I was like, I want to do that. So it was like a natural opportunity to like try to talk about some high-minded stuff and meet some interesting people, and also like illuminate my own reality. Like, what the fuck? Like, why is RFT and VB an actual problem? Like, why do people care about this? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, or why are we relegated to the back of the bus as behavior analysts versus psychologists? Because I personally feel like I'm fucking awesome at this, and I feel like what they do is not as good, and it's trashy, honestly, like not, and when it's by like not effective, but somehow in society, like they have more value than I do as a professional, and my people do. So why is that the case? Like, or like just all the different topics we tackle, or like why is it that like there's so many like authority high-minded figures in the field that dictate how things are discussed or dictates the terms or conditions of conversation and discourse, and there's not a lot of room for like other voices? Like, why is it like that? Why is academia such a like have a stranglehold over certain things, and why is there so many different like gatekeepers,
Yeah.
Like that stuff those were questions that I didn't like, I was grappling with at the time. And just you and I are like-minded people, I think, and we just got into conversation over beers, and we're like, this is a podcast, dude. And like,
and with any podcast comes the questions of just for example, how much do you script or pre-plan, how much do you freeform? And like, I think reflecting on last year, there was a large, literally every episode was us trying to figure out like how much to do that, how much to plan and chat about the topic beforehand, how much to plan on our own, how much to potentially bring somebody else into the conversation, how to conduct a discussion with more than just us, how to work together, just you and I, back and forth on the volume back and forth. And those are the growing pains that I think, at least in hindsight, I realize now that we were going through, and I expected to a degree, but also reflecting back on the first 20 episodes that we did on the other podcast I'm part of, Why We Do What We Do, that the first 20 episodes kind of took us to were required for us to kind of find our cadence, to find our, the way in which we're going. So
the dynamics between the two of us was a big piece for sure. That I think that but also just the pressure to feel like, I think also, again, going back to A-type personalities, I'm a super competitive person, and obviously you are too. So I think between the two of us, we weren't we were getting to know each other still too. So it's I was trying to impress you, you were kind of trying to impress me, and I think part of it too, as far as our dynamic was playing out, was we were just trying to outpace each other for who could be the most ridiculous and who was the smartest guy in the room. I think a little bit too, and that kind of and not to mention trying to live up to the title of our podcast. And we just exuded our personas in a way that I think made me feel really insecure at sometimes, feel kind of exposed, and also made it difficult, a lot more difficult than I think we anticipated, to get people on the podcast that wanted to open up and talk. Because we really wanted to tackle big topics, but I mean, it's interesting how guarded everybody is as far as wanting to talk about those things openly and in public, especially prominent figures in what we do. And really the only person that I still have a connection with that person. I consider him a mentor actually now. And I love the guy, is Merrill Winston, who's the realest dude in the world. And is just the most, keeping it real to the max.
So if we wanted to look at some stats on things, and he was actually the most listened to podcast at Unethical and Unprofessional Behavior Analysts, diving into that.
Interesting.
Followed by the EAB episode, which I'm still slightly surprised of. I think that's one of the hardest topics to make really interesting, and I've had 2 times now, once on a video and once on this, where I was surprised that people were interested in. I think it's probably just because of the novelty of putting it in a little bit of a different form. It's usually in these more esoteric articles, and it's put in a different medium, so I think there's an effect there. But not to discredit, it was a fun conversation. One of my favorites actually last year was EAB Still Breathing.
The Tina conversation was one of my favorites personally too.
And that was number 3 on our list. These are all really darn close too when you look at it. The work-life balance was one, and then Do We Deserve to Branch Out with Miranda. That's our top 5 at least.
Miranda's awesome. I would love to have her on again.
Yeah, spanning across a few dozen countries, which is cool. Obviously, majority in United States, as well as followed by Canada. Yeah, I guess that's where the kind of stats are. It looks like a consistent listener base of about 1,000, which is cool. That's a solid community. And I would say for us sorting out what we're trying to do, having at least that many folks tune in, first of all, is fucking cool. Number 2, it's created some good feedback loops for us. I'm getting some listener mail and things like that. So, I don't know. I'm ready for I would say for the podcast, a maturation, a nice next step throughout 2020.
Yeah, man, I'm thinking that the biggest goal that I have is to really firmly be me and feel a lot less compelled and pressured to push people to speak the thing that I want them to say. Because I think just as an interviewer, I felt pressured to take the hard oppositional stance, even if it wasn't something I cared about or agreed with, just to get the other person to say the thing. Or to get them to talk about it, and almost I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So only this time, yeah. It's more I just wanted my opinion, what I think, what I do, what I believe, how I do it, and you know what I mean. That's it. If you like it, cool. If you don't, you don't. But
which we actually even had the discussion late 2019 about should we rename the podcast as a result of all these issues, which. Decided no at the end of the day. We'll see how it goes, but could always fix that later on down the road. So yeah, I think podcast 2020. We're actually spoiler alert, recording this after we recorded some others. We got some exciting stuff coming to you. A little bit of a different approach is the nutshell here, and really excited to see what you all have to say about it. I don't know if we have a commitment to like upload quantity schedules and stuff, but gonna do the best we can to put out at least as much as last year. I always have a goal of more, obviously, and we're on track to do some really cool stuff, both quality and quantity wise, it looks like.
Yeah, I think that like we're gonna switch to gears. The big thing that I think is gonna change is that rather than looking at like versus stuff topically, like this idea versus that idea, or like even looking to have outside people come in, like I love having these discussions with some people, and Merrill can come on our podcast when the fuck he wants, like of course. Tina is more than welcome back. Like a lot of people are welcome back, of course, and anyone else who would be interested, like we're here to have a discussion if there's a worthwhile discussion to be had. But I think the biggest thing is that like it needs to be about stuff that matters for like real people doing the work, and like actually informing in a way that makes it accessible, because I think that was my biggest bone to pick, and I was for me, I think it was coming off, I don't want to use it, not angrier, but a lot more aggressive than I think it was intended. Is that like the underlying bubbling frustration that I think exists just generally is that the lack of accessibility of materials and lack of accessibility to stuff, and then uber formality. Like for me, I don't like the uber formality of stuff. So like the reason we were going for that like a little bit more unscripted, raw, uncut feel on the podcast was because it was like, okay, I don't want people to think that this is like totally prepared, totally like rehearsed, completely vetted. I want people to have a sneak peek into what it feels like to, see what people are talking about just when they're coming off the cuff, and what they know and what they don't know, without necessarily like presenting this like really polished situation. And, it went, I'm happy with what happened. Like I thought we had a great time. Obviously we recorded a lot of stuff we didn't use because it really hit some areas that even got uncomfortable for us in a way where like, you know what, that's, and not necessarily like egregious or terrible, but like more like, that's not quite the tone we want to set.
Yeah, I would say there's I think 3, maybe 4 episodes that were shared, like, hey, we're recording on this topic, do you have perspectives? One was gun control, and that one actually doesn't necessarily fall perfectly because we had actually a big audio error on that one where an online service dropped, but so we lost a lot of stuff, which made it hard. But also there's this theme that kept coming up for me, I guess, which was not quite right, which I learned from Linda Hayes, great behavior analyst, where I was going through undergrad classes and she'd write NQR and there was like no feedback like on your paper. It's not quite right. And you're like, what? Which I actually now come to love a lot. And we talk about that in one of these episodes coming up. But the podcast was kind of giving me that feeling of like not quite right, not quite getting there. And so, yeah, kind of putting some of those things forever in the tomes of the archives on my computer over here, and moving forward is the goal. And trying to really think about what y'all are interested in. So as always, please let us know if there's topics. The thing that's kind of related to this and the not quite right and sorting it out is it's always, I kind of pitch it as like an extension of the Daily BA, video stuff that I do, and I'm working to trying to kind of formalize these a little bit more. So, what's essentially I'm trying to sort out so people know is these really specific conversations that are maybe jargon, or like you need some sort of understanding what behavior analysis is or the systems in behavior analysis. I want to house them solely here on the Controversial Exchange. And that's kind of for 2 reasons. It's clearer that way as to like what goes where when it comes to content, but also I had this question when it came to Daily BA stuff of like, would people consume it? Would it be interesting? Where could it go? A lot of open-ended questions. And I think it's one of those things where you never know when you've accomplished something. And I don't think I've accomplished this greatly, but I feel like I've got an idea of how to create something that is more or less useful for behavior analysts, or at least like it's starting to form enough there to where it's like, okay, let's keep making that, but let's start exploring how to make stuff for like a general audience. And so that's what I'm really interested in doing is like, could I create a video that is fueled off of behavior analysis that is consumable by somebody that's outside of the field, and them in a sense come away with this appreciation or realization of like, there is this world out there of behavior analysis, even if that's not explicitly stating it at any point in the video. And so that's kind of, I guess, the chapter I'm turning over the next few months. So
I got a question for you, man. What?
Yeah.
Why do you think people like? I guess I don't know. Let me try this again. What are there? Is it narcissistic to think people care what we have to say?
Yes. My thing, the way I kind of justify this though is there's so many useful ideas out there. And this kind of goes into what we talked about in one of the future episodes of like, there's other stuff outside of behavior analysis that's really useful. Like I've learned so much from like the videography community. It's weird when it comes to little things with controlling and influencing stimulus control. Like that's really what a video is trying to do, is influence stimulus control in various degrees. And it makes sense looking at it from a behavioral perspective, but like it's easier and more well articulated, I think, from their point of view sometimes. And so I look at behavior analysis the same way. As like, I think we have two things. Like we're kind of taught by many, like this is like the mother of all sciences, queen of sciences, and this is the end all be all. And we have some cool ways in which you could really understand other sciences from our perspective. But really, I think we've kind of carved out a couple areas that we know really well, and it's about reaching and working out there with others. So my plans always get, I guess they're going to see where they end up, but the plan is to start recording with other professions. So actually today, it's January 3rd, I'm meeting with a local entrepreneur, local behavior analyst, a local case manager and social worker, and a local, who's the other one? I feel like I'm blanking. Oh my gosh. Point is, it's another profession. And I want to start seeing if I can figure out how to articulate and create some sort of videos around what are the things that we maybe know really well, but other people know really well. Like, where are those intersections? Does that make sense?
Yeah, man. I love I love that idea. I think that
it's going to be uncomfortable and weird too, on some ways, man. Like
getting put in a position to be like not the expert in the room is a positive. Number one. Number two is like seeing like what real quote unquote interdisciplinary work might look like. You know what I mean? Not like competing for like attention or control over a case, but like trying to see how you can amalgamate how different points of view can produce a beautiful thing is pretty interesting. And coming from such like crazy different categorical areas is, I think, a big thing. So yeah, I think that's all good stuff. I mean, for me personally, it's more like because I know that we were talking about that earlier, the narcissism thing, and like, I don't know, man. I feel like the other thing that this podcast does, or just in general what podcasting does for people, is that it lets you explore kind of like publicly your own journey, intellectual journey for certain stuff. And like for me, that's what it is. Like this is for me, like, number one, I really enjoy our interactions. Like it's super fun to develop friendship with you over this time, but also like just like being able to, I don't know, sit down and articulate my position on something and articulate it publicly and like say, hey, you know what, this is what I believe. I could be wrong, but I like it.
Yeah.
And finding your voice. I always go back to this idea, like if you're compelled to do something, like I'm not very superstitious at all. I try to like maintain as objective a position, even in my own personal life, actually, which sometimes to my wife's chagrin. But like I feel this compulsion to speak. And like you're a great conversational partner to be able to explore that feeling with. So like, I don't know. I feel like if you have a compulsion to do something, you should listen to your intuition. You should follow through with it. And like that's what this is for me.
Should we just hug it out right now over the air?
Yeah, dude. Let's do it.
Little slap on the back. No, I appreciate it.
Man.
Yeah,
I love you. But I mean, no, seriously, like it's good shit, dude.
I can't. I wasn't given the emphasis I should on like the personal satisfaction and the reasons to do these sort of things. Which comes down to, like there's something so cool about just hopping online and chatting with someone across the country about a shared passion and throwing it out there. And I also think there's this is an interesting thing too, because it kind of gets back into like, is this something that, do we really have something to offer to people out there as a field of behavior analysis? Same goes to us. Like, I have this sense of this sort of conversation isn't happening, so we should put it out there. Am I the best? Probably not, but like I feel like it's close enough, like and like if someone else were to come out and just like trounce it and nail it, then maybe I'd reconsider or shift perspectives or work with them or something, but it's kind of like now with the field growing so quickly, of behavior analysis and like the certification realm. I see a lot of I would say they're traditional behavior analysts, or I used to say senior behavior analysts. And really all I'm saying there is you've been in the field for 10 years plus, and you're seeing this kind of transition and growing pains. And the one thing that we can do to help out any growing pains, if that is because, say, some research isn't being thought about, or like somebody hasn't been trained in a certain program, the best way to do that is just to contribute to the solution, which is putting things back out there for folks to consume. And so, again, don't think we're the best, but been pretty damn lucky to have a lot of mentors and a lot of cool shit thrown at me that I think a lot of people are looking for. So it's like, seems like the best solution is start chatting and throwing those things out there. So,
hey man, I watched this, I love, this is for working out and stuff. You watch like motivational videos and stuff, just keep it going. I'm like,
yeah,
if not you, who, if not now, when, type questions. And like the other thing is that like, why not? Like, I think that a lot of us, especially when we're talking about mixing business and pleasure, which is what this is for me, this is a fun side thing that I do with, zero remuneration, and Ryan doesn't this is simply a thing that we do because it's fun. Hopefully one day it'll pay off, but it doesn't right now. And like, it's like, the fun matters, and the whole thing is just the most exciting. And like, I've spent a lot of my life governed by fear or trepidation or concern for how things will impact other areas of my life. And like, this is an opportunity to just kind of like not be confined or controlled by certain semblances of fear or like other controls or other people's points of view, and kind of like facing those and overcoming them.
There's something liberating about throwing shit out there and making it through any sort of online criticism and trolling and shit, man.
I mean, there is, man. And like, honestly, like this podcast for me, again, like goes back to, I think about like my favorite presidents. My two favorite presidents are the Roosevelts, right? Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, and for different reasons. But I mean, like, Teddy Roosevelt was known as the bull moose, and he has that thing about the man in the arena. And like, it's not the critic who counts type thing. And that's kind of like my philosophy on the podcast, or really in general life now, honestly, but especially this, because this is so public and it is so permanent because the internet never forgets. But it's like, we are critics too. So, I mean, like, in all fairness, like if someone finds our critique unfair, you're totally well within your rights to dismiss us. But on the inverse of that too, it's that like, if, having the courage to speak your mind is in my opinion, a limited thing in today's world. And actually not only that, but like justify it substantively while not engaging in false, disingenuine, logically fallacious argumentation. Mm-hmm. I think that is a contribution that is unique and is necessarily something worth doing. And I don't know, I feel it's like a value thing, and like it really does speak to what I believe. So that's why it's easy in terms of those things go, and why I think it's important, what I think the value is to the listeners. And honestly, I think the gratitude to people who listen to this podcast, because I mean, like, if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we first conceived of this thing, when we first started talking about it, at least, it's like, whoa, do you think we'd have 1,000 people want to listen to our episodes on a regular basis? That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like 1,000, that's 1,000 people, man. Like, that's a lot,
Yeah, that's massive.
That's not like 20 people in their, whatever, mom's house or what's driving, and like seeing it grow like that. And also like people sharing their opinions online and engaging in discourse with us and that kind of thing. So it's been a lot of gratitude that I feel there, and a lot of satisfaction, and a lot of like, I just feel real lucky as far as that goes. And I hope over time we get to expand the audience a little bit and bring more people into the fold, because, we talk about waking people up out of the matrix, and that's part of the goal of the podcast is like, I want to red pill people in terms of like how we think about the field, man. I really want them to get out of like the rut that I think a lot of people are in, and even that I was in. And that's why I think I found the podcast personally, was that like, I was in such a rut professionally, and such a rut personally, and such a rut in terms of like, resources and thinking and exposure. And I mean, just all the stuff that really wakens your soul, and I really wanted to open up really wanted to expand my boundaries and do that. And again, I have to thank you for that, dude, because honestly, like, I don't travel like you do. So like, I live vicariously through your adventures, and you know what I mean? I get exposed to a lot of cool things just in lieu of being able to like, converse with you about that stuff. So it's a way for me to be in contact with like the outside world in that way, and contact people I would have never had that. So like, I really value that significantly.
Yeah, dude, I'm always glad to share that with like-minded people, and I've always considered that like a wave. It's just like someone ride a wave, like eventually it's going to end. And yeah, there was a year and a half, 2 years that seems to be slowing down quite a bit of just like insanity traveling around with opportunities. And there's a whole lot I could talk about there. This kind of we've kind of dabbled, but we can really push into like the personal life aspect, I guess. So yeah, so I guess for me, kind of in a nutshell, it was a continual quest the last like 2 years, almost 2.5 years now, of can I essentially live the life of a air quote digital nomad, podcast, videos, things like this, and make a living and move forward. And so goal number 1 was a successful year in business. I've done 2 of those now. I think most of them fail within 3, so time's still kind of telling on that, but I'm feeling pretty confident on being able to do that. And to be clear, it's not like the podcast is making bank at all. It's through figuring out ways to kind of supplement and spend time on the things you love through doing some other things out there. So, yeah, man, like it was around July or August of this 2019 year where I was like, I can take a breath. Like I felt like for once I could like chill, and I didn't have to wake up the next day stressed out of like, what's next? What do you do? I didn't tell anybody this. When I left my full-time job in the June of 2018, I had 22 days of cash on hand. That was it for like life and business. And it was like, all right, I've got 3 weeks to figure this out. So it was like go time, which is I would never advocate anybody do, but I was like in a spot to where it was like, you go for it now on those terms, which I literally called up my mom and dad and said, hey, I might end up on the couch in a month. Like, this is what's going on. And they're like, we fully support you going for it, do whatever. But it was, I don't wake up with that anymore. So like, I guess for me, it was like a nice win of having a longer runway to be able to breathe and work with, essentially. So that's pretty dope. And I guess the more you do anything, the more clear it gets. So we talked about the podcast being more clear, but the video side's getting more clear when it comes to what I offer to help out the field, how that works, how to get somebody on, say a video, and like what the processes are for that, all that sort of stuff. So it's just like life's a lot more clear after 2 years of chaos. So it's comfortable, and that's nice.
I mean, I think that that's great that you got that clarity. I mean, I'm definitely still in the thick of stuff, but I mean, like 2019 was a crazy year. Like, oh my God, like I had a baby. Like I switched jobs. I finished a thesis. I defended it. I almost had a doctoral nervous breakdown. Like, but I mean, I learned so much last year. Like, I feel like last year, as far as like knowledge getting pumped into my brain, is the most information I've ever been able to explore in my life.
That's one of my favorite things of working on this with you, is like you consume a lot of shit all the time. I would literally be like, hey man, have you seen this podcast episode? And you're like, yeah, brrr, and you give me a reply on it. And I'm like, come on man, this came out like 24 hours ago. You're in a doc program. You got a lit review of like 30 things to read. How'd you do all this? So it's good to be around people like
you sleep 5 hours and you are obsessive. But yeah, like, so like, yeah, I definitely, thank you, man. Yeah, it's been, but honestly, like now I feel like it's changed me in a way that I didn't think was possible. I think from what it's been for me is a lesson in limitations and boundaries. And like on the real, like I suffered from extreme laziness, a pretty significant part of my life. I half-assed college. I fucking half-assed my life. And last 4 or 5 years, especially since I first went back for graduate school, like that changed significantly. The fire got lit under my ass. I don't know why. I think I just got really interested and obsessed with the field. The field kind of saved me in that way. And it's molded what I think so much that like I feel this responsibility towards it, and it really fed into like everything else. And the podcast honestly was just like the culmination of like years of self-exploration and introspection and like evaluation and reading and just wanting to share all the different lessons I feel like I've learned that saved me from that. because like it really did. Like it's been nothing but a transformative experience for me overall. So yeah, man, I hope that continues into 2020. I mean, it's definitely slowed down a little bit. My level of consumption has dropped dramatically in comparison to what it was before. But I mean, balancing an infant and
it goes in waves,
responsibility,
dude.
you know. Yeah. I think it does. I think it will go ups and ebbs and flows are real. Ebbs and flows are real. But yeah, this is just awesome, man. I have so much fun doing this. So I hope people like it.
So
the field in review.
Yeah, so the field in review. Man, I've got a few general thoughts. Let's save the like really big I would say really big BACB announcement till the end of this. Try to go somewhat chronologically. One thing that I've been kind of anecdotally gathering from both attendees and organizers of events is there's just way too much professional development opportunities going on out there, and there's definitely a changing in this. So I started co-hosting these sort of things about 3-4 years ago, when there was essentially a lot of them were just like the Association of Behavior Analysis International and like affiliate ones, but there's a lot of private ones popping up, and I'm all for that. Like, it's dope. I was obviously a part of it, but it seems like there's people are reporting that not only is there a lot to choose from, there's not enough time, resources, etc. to go to them all, and we're hitting that threshold, but also it's getting harder to convince people to show up to certain numbers of them. And I think that's just a changing in the continuing education, like in-person model, and some interesting changes going on in the market, which is, for me, even more fascinating because, so for example, like state associations are having a harder time breaking their numbers. And they might be like, oh, we had 20 more people this year. But when you look at the number of certificates entering our field, what's actually happening right now is there's less and less people proportionally that are going to these events than there are that are not going to them. Like it's flipping in a sense of where it used to be. So I don't know. I feel like there's this changing in our culture happening right now as to what's valuable, what you and like who's trying to provide what in a sense. Does that make sense? Like,
oh, dude, well, I think what you're describing is we're seeing what it looks like to transition something from small, intimate, niche to scale. And ultimately what that scale brings about, and also what big money brings into it. So like there's always been those select chosen few who had the advanced enough education and resources to pull some stuff together and like control the strings of the field. But I think, going back to reviewing some of our podcasts, the first one we did with Rick, when we started talking about the notion of private equity coming into the field and what kind of big money influences that are not academically oriented towards what we do, right? They don't give a shit about behavior analysis. They give a shit about making money.
Yeah,
and it just so happens behavior
return to shareholder, man.
ROI, right? So like how that changes the dynamic, and then also as a result of that, giving a little bit more resources to people who have not been part of that like more dominant king making, like point of view making, driving force is going to continue to expand. I think we're witnessing what scale looks like, and that goes with those state organizations and stuff, and also goes with what people have to say, man. Like again, like it's been so canned for a long time because people have relied, I think, on like these standardized people to tell them what they think, and now that you got to be more creative to keep people's interest, you got to actually know what the fuck you're talking about, and you actually have to bring a greater degree of value for a lot less than what you had to before. The amount of effort that's required to do that.
I mean, we saw just I think there's us plus another 6 podcasts that launched last year or something like that. Like that's like the thing. The tides are changing, I guess, and it's clear from a few different angles. And it makes them, it's also a degree of who's trying to leverage what angles. So like in turning on a podcast in 2019 with a growing field is going to get you a lot more bang for your buck than writing an article. I'm sorry, we should hold up one as more valuable than the other in certain ways, and vice versa. But like, that's clearly happening because the changing times and the way things are consumed now. So it's this like also interesting kind of change of tides. I feel like you were kind of talking about this, like who is the expert on what and why, right? So I've always considered ABI, for example, like a home for the science of behavior analysis and like one of the most valuable conferences. But I saw a poll recently in a Facebook group where over 2/3 of the people that answered it said that they had never heard of it or didn't consider going to it for whatever reason. And for me, it's like almost every professional connection I've made resulted in somehow like a talk, or it kind of like ended up at the bar or meeting someone there. Like it came through that. So it's interesting to see how like source of influences seem to be completely shifting, and we'll see what happens.
Dude, again, like I think the internet is the great equalizer. It democratizes power. It just does. The question is like, how can it be wielded? How can you increase your sphere of influence? And are you saying something that resonates with people? That's the other thing, right?
Well, yeah. So a good example of that is like we saw the BACB turn on a podcast. It's, I think, an audio update. I guess it falls under podcasts. Yeah. I think for it to be consistently out there would be the one thing that I think would be more valuable rather than just kind of when they have important updates, which I kind of get. But man, there's a lot of stuff you could share there. That'd be really interesting to know. I would literally just like to know, like, what is a day in the life of Jim Carr like? Or any role in there, right? Like what are the actual day-to-days like, and what are they going through? Like, there's so much content that can be pulled out of that. But that's where it's like ABI really cranked out their blogs, their blog posts, which I don't know how many people are reading. That'd be interesting to know. They're tailored to a scientific audience and technical, but I don't even know if you read those things, man. But like, there's some like, it's solid work.
That's the one thing I don't stay up on is the organizational stuff.
Yeah, dude, it's like a fantastic articles are being written. And
I see an ABAI email, and actually it goes into my spam folder.
Yeah,
this is not a personal attack. Like, it's just, I'm just honestly stating what I do. Like, it's not.
Well,
because
that's part of it. Is like, I
think
think what we as a field are trying to sort out, and what we should be putting emphasis to if we're not, is what channels are appropriate, how frequently, like what mediums do we need to be putting things in. And what I was getting at there is like, that is a fantastic resource. Blog posts probably could have been turned on earlier. The BACB podcast probably could have been turned on earlier, but the same could be said about a lot of the stuff that we've been doing on here. And I think it's more so a result of like a scientific field and profession evolves slower. And so I can't throw anybody under the bus for that, but it's interesting to see things that were, in a sense, kind of heyday 10 years ago now entering our field, and to see how they alter things. Like, and literally within like a year or two, you could have a totally different entity because of how fast things are going to start moving. Like the Behavior Bitches podcast, like that thing's on fire right now. It's on fire right now. I think it's on fire, and like it's so on fire that it's making people uncomfortable in these different entities. I'm really excited. We're gonna get into this. I'm still scripting it, or not scripting, but noting it out on like the air quote ABA landscape, because I want to kind of do one on that. And my thing is like, love them or hate them, like there's changes going on, right? And that's the stuff that I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to articulate is, within the blink of an eye, air quote, 6 months, a year, whatever, but relatively short in our field, things are changing and evolving quite rapidly, and they're going to continue to only do that for the foreseeable next 5 or 10 years at least, as everything keeps exponentially growing. It's kind of a rat race.
I think that the lesson to be drawn from this personally, that I think for anybody who's listening, is that like, opportunity is everywhere. And I think especially when we do, like, if you're willing to take a little bit of a risk, there's opportunity. Like, you're not, this is internet circa 99. Like, serious.
It is.
Like, so like, think about that bubble when it finally did burst, and who owned Amazon at 4 cents. I'm just saying, like, and again, not to make it all dollars and cents, but I mean, like, even just in terms of like personal satisfaction, gratification, and like personal achievement, like, obviously money matters and shit. But I mean, like, for me too, like, part of this endeavor, and again, why I didn't do it 10, 11 years ago when I first wanted to do it, is like the fear and that like personal restraint from like putting yourself out there, and like seeing the different cycles of how things come and go. And like, I see the field as expanding in a way that is going to really blossom at some point in the next 10 to 15 years, like unbelievably, because especially as big money continues to come in and over time as these different power structures change, because it will be more meritocracy. Like, it will be more like that. It'll be a lot less governed by the politics of the ivory tower, and a lot less about who you know and what you know over time. So, I mean, like, do that. Take advantage of it, because I think we're going to try. And we're going to do that, just being ourselves and shit. But yeah, the field is like... The field continues to change every day and it continues to astound me. Honestly, Facebook groups too. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there was a couple of like big ass groups that came out of like obscurity and now like dominate the conversation too online. I think that's a big one too, where people have a responsibility. They should think about their governing their communities, but also that just like the power of those communities in terms of like how much influence you can exert over like how things happen.
I mean, the Confessions of Behavior Analysis group, which is where we really connected with Merrill, they're running a small conference in June, it looks like. And I've ran those things. Those things are a lot of work. But there's a lot of reward in them too. And it's interesting to see what happens there. There's those things influence more than we think. You know, I've been slowly working on what I call like what was it? Just kind of like a ABA social media 101. It was meant to be for business owners to just get a one pager of each platform, like what's going on, how to utilize it. It turned into 4 pagers essentially, because there's a lot there to kind of communicate, but I still tried to like force myself to truncate it. And it was fun because, dude, there's so much that is out there. I guess this is partially a call for like, if I don't know about something, I'd love to know about it so I can add it to it. But there's the Facebook groups, the Instagram community, there's LinkedIn, there's YouTube, there's a Reddit community, which is pretty fun. You get some snarky Reddit stuff that goes on in there too. There's a Discord community of folks that are just kind of like chatting about their day-to-day struggles. And the two that are really interesting to me is the Reddit and the Discord, because it's a lot easier. I can get you an invite link. It's a lot easier to be anonymous on those platforms. And so it also bends the rules of how we're supposed to conduct things. So I think maybe to start transitioning into bigger things in the field too, like it's clear that the growing pains are becoming big enough that entities and boards are having to do different things. I mean, I don't know if this was officially this year or if it was the year before, like in 2018, but the Association of Behavior Analysis International taken over the verified course sequence. Like I looked at that as the BACB was like, hey, we shouldn't be necessarily doing this. We should have another entity doing this. The most recent, basically New Year's Eve, they dropped some big news talking about how they're not going to be supporting in the way that they used to international certificates and upholding those for various different reasons. It's like, we're shifting big pawns here at the time of crazy growth in a very young field. Like, I feel like the risk, if I was looking at it from a business perspective, like we're only increasing the risk by moving all this shit around and all these variables kind of coming together. So I don't know. Some days I feel like the world is going to be better and behavior analysis is going to be cool in the forefront and like helping things out. And other days I'm like, narcissistic, we're toast. Like everything's going to come crumbling down in the next 5 years. It's probably an in-between, but...
I don't know. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It can go either way, obviously. There's always options for it to go either way. But I mean, like, there's too much interest. There's too much money. There's too much...
There is, but like that's an interesting angle, man. I was talking to someone that was crunching the numbers, and this is a presentation out of the Nevada Association of Behavior Analysis. There is just as much money in autism right now in providing services in our field as there is in substance abuse disorders, which is a 4-to-1 prevalence rate, not a 51-to-1 or 38-to-1. And when you look at that, like that allocation of resources is something that I feel like is going to start to change. Like, will these larger entities that are paying the bill be okay with continually adding approximately, like conservatively, 10 times the amount of resources to one part of the medical model issues versus others? Like, I don't know. And that's not my discussion. Like, that's not my decision, but like there's a from my understanding of that, there's an autism bubble in that sense of the funding. And like, if we're getting our systems built around these pay rates and structures, like we're in a really vulnerable spot as a field.
Oh, I totally think there's an autism bubble. That's definitely the case. But that just means there'll be a stabilization at some point, and then it'll come out and like standardize the way that it's provided and probably mirror more of a counsel perspective where it has to be direct care or direct service provision on the part of a behavior analyst.
What? And like what we're seeing, like
OTs and speech have to do. Like speech do the service, not RBTs, or RBSs or whatever they are. You know what I mean?
Was that it, dude? Like, I know this is all speculative, but like in 5 years, are we going to be getting 1 hour a week to provide services like those other models? 15 minutes here and there? Like, these are things that I think could realistically be happening.
Yeah, devastating to the field from an economics perspective. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I also think that like over time that will force us into those other arenas too, right? Because that's what market forces do. They drive you. So like, I mean, like, and there's research being done, and like, say, let's just take your example of the substance abuse. Like, people are starting to look into that. Actually, for finally, we've been talking about getting into that kind of stuff, but like, people are finally doing research in that. Like, ACBS is a lot of substance abuse stuff, and like, they are doing that work. So I don't know. Even if that happens, though, my thing is like, even if that happens, I feel like it's not like people will be completely out of work or anything like that. Like, there'll always be opportunity. But I'm thinking more in terms of like driving forces of the field, though. Nothing but onward and upward trajectory. Like, there's like the downward trend would be weird. I don't see that happening. It would be devastating.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's where I don't know. Like, I've got a sense of worry for current students or younger professionals like ourselves, and what might happen if those market forces come down pretty quickly. Like, after spending 2.5 years struggling on not my first, not my second, but my third attempt getting a business going, like, it's not quick, and it's a lot of work. And so it's kind of like, man, I feel like we're in a vulnerable spot, but hell, man, you can only take it day by day, right?
Well, and I also think that's just the reality of starting the idea of independent business provision too. Like, yeah, on the other hand too, like, there are a lot of people just going out there on their own. That is the case, and that will get harder probably. It's already started to get a little harder, I think, just because you have to compete on a grander scale with people with more resources, and honestly, like, you aren't that good yet. So like, it limits your ability to manage and juggle a lot of stuff to make yourself viable on a more grander scale. So that's just a real limitation from a business angle. But I don't know, like, I still think that regardless, there's still those opportunities are going to be there one way or the other somewhere along the line, and I am very optimistic as far as that goes. Seriously.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a way for us to fit in. That was actually, I guess, a cool reflection point on not only the year but my career. Is like, one of the things I love most about behavior analysis was the idea that if I needed to, I could change an entire like industry or job or business that I was a part of, and I could still bring it with me. Like, human behavior is always going to be there. And so in a sense, it kind of was like, hey, if I love this stuff so much, this is job security. It might not look the same ever, but there's job security, and like, this field will always be there, right?
Yeah. There's just so much shit. It's just so much. It's too much to even start thinking about, honestly. Like, it really is.
Yeah, and I didn't mean for this to go that way, but it kind of leads me to this point of feeling kind of like overwhelmed, like, with how much is going on,
Yeah, who do you pick?
Man,
what do you pick? Who are your game players? All that stuff. Like, you don't ever know. Yeah, and like, going back to like, how does this relate to the podcast or year in review or anything like that? I think it's more about like lessons learned here for us. Like, for me, is that like, I don't know. I just the more I keep learning about things, the more I discover, the more people I talk to, the less and less secure I feel about what I know, but somehow my knowledge base is growing relative to that. So it's like, how is it that the more you learn and the more you become aware of things, the less confident you feel in things? And I think feeling what you know and how you're executing on it, and like, that imposter syndrome is always there in the background, and that notion of like, do you deserve to be here, and that kind of thing. So I mean, just like, for a lesson of listeners and just watching us even explore this question of where the field's going or that kind of thing, is, I hope from our podcast and in general for yourself, what you take is that, like, all we can do is keep trying, keep pushing, keep doing what we can do, and keep learning.
There's a lot more out to the field than meets the eye, I would say. And like, yeah, I guess a thank you to all the listeners. Like, it's cool that you all allow us to be an avenue to share those sort of things. But also, that's what drives us to keep learning them. And it's just kind of this cool cyclical thing where it just kind of keeps evolving off of each other, influencing it.
The listeners are like officially now, I mean, like, just in general, everything that's come through and what's happened and like everything that's gone on this year and like being able to execute in the podcast, like, it's been an inspiration to want to get better. It's been an inspiration to keep pushing. The sleeplessness and the grinding through articles that make my eyes want to bleed. Or like I'm just like, why am I reading this? Like, you know, like it's because like you come back, you give the feedback, you participate, you talk, and like you say, you share your opinions and you find value in what we're doing and you give us inspiration. Like I personally need that to keep going and things. And again, this is a labor of love. So it's and it's just like a fun thing. We get to do this. Like I get to do this podcast.
Yeah.
I don't have to do it. I get to do it. And that was the one thing about like when we took our break and we're after we did all those episodes, it's like, you know, we originally planned to do one a month for 12 months and then we did like 16, but really we did more like 23.
Yeah.
And like, if you guys, you know, obviously talking about the preparation that we go into is like a lot of shit. And then like coming back to it after taking some time off, it's a fun thing. And we hope that this year's a little bit more fun. This year's going to be a little bit more participatory. And like, I think a call to action is more like what we want from you is just simply your input. We want you to participate. Tell us what you think. And tell us, you know, what you want to learn about so that we can learn about more about it and add to the discussion. What do you want to talk to us about? That's what
I'm going to say ways to do that. Making an active commitment to more stuff on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook when it comes to polls, discussions, perspectives, stuff like that. And so really watch those channels, turn on your notifications. I will formally be getting a YouTube channel set up for this content so that it is housed where it should be under its own entity. And so I guess be aware of like those things are going to be shifting. And what else, man? I had something else to say. I think my big call to action for this one first would be if anyone has the time to write out like how their 2019 went, as short or long, please email us that. It'd be super cool to just know a bit of your perspective as to how the year went, what you're thinking about for 2020, right? Any of that.
And also, like, we want to experiment with formatting. That's the biggest thing. We want to experiment with the format of the podcast. Like we did this reaction video where we watched Skinner's last speech and where we like listened to him talk and then we comment on it. We have like 3 or 4 more of those types of videos we want to do. Skinner on Education, Murray Sidman, a couple others. And honestly, if there's a format or a thing or that you guys would like to do, like I would almost even have fun like sitting here and just doing straight up Q&A and or just reading listener comments for an hour. Like I want to do fun stuff with the community and with the people who want to talk with me. Like that's the thing. Going back to like what made the podcast feel like work there for a second was begging people to want to come talk to us. Well, we want to talk to the people who want to talk to us, and you are our community. So you provide us those opportunities. That
is a great way to say what I'm trying to also kind of go for on the Daily BA, which is who wants to create, the cool stuff, and like let's head that way. Let's lock arms. Let's go forward.
All right, man. Marvelous.
That'll make more sense after the Skinner episode, y'all. So, all right, let's wrap up there. Thank you all for your time. It's been lovely as always. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all those sort of things. And we'll see you in the next one, right, Dimitri?
Yeah, absolutely. Catch you later.
Peace.